girl sweat lacing rivulets like veins in the sand, her small hands on her knees, not doves, but hands, gripping, a palm pressed to her spine, fronds whispering like voyeurs overhead. Oh, Mary, like a god, I too take pleasure in knowing you are not all holy that ache could undo you like a knot. And suffering, I admire this girl who cared for a moment not about God or his plans, but her own distinct life. This fiercer Mary who'd disappear if it saved her, who'd howl to hell with salvation if it meant this pain. The blessed adolescent who squatted indignant in a desert, bearing his child like a secret she never wanted to hear. This poem is called Muqtadiya, which is Arabic for beginner, one who sees blood for the first time. And there's an epigraph from the Quran, which says, "And indeed, appointed over you are keepers, noble and recording. They know whatever you do." Hidden in a dim stall, as the muezzin called all worshippers to prayer, I touched privately the indelible stain and watched, with a nascent sense of kinship, the women washing through the interstice of the door, their veils slipping off like water, water spotting their clothes like rain. I thought the thought only children and the pious believe, that I was just like that, no longer a girl. The blood my summons, blot like a seal, a scarlet membership card slid from my innermost pocket. I was newly 12 and wise enough to be frightened. I had read the book and so understood my own was now opening, alighting onto my shoulders like some ethereal bird, flapping briefly immaculate wings, and understood too that I myself engendered the ink with which, on its pages, my sins would forever be written. Not literally, but this was how I imagined it, metaphor, as the blood brought God's recorders like sharks to me, Monarch a bright flare, a matador's crimson cape. I had not been good all my life, but until this first vermilion drip, I lived unobserved. My sins, not sins, because no one looked. And now, above, like a lamp suddenly ablaze, God's reproachful eye turned my way, a searchlight eternally, searching and seeing and seeing. I was as good as I would ever be. In the dark, the ruddy iris stared back at me. Sarcoma. When the doctor says the word sarcoma, I consider how it might be a nice name for a daughter. That good feminine A, the way parents name their children for all sorts of inappropriate things. Apples, for instance, or the place where the baby was conceived. And I trace my fingers over the barrow of my belly as he speaks, flesh distended beneath the blue tissue I wear for a dress, an ideal grief frock. Throwaway. And he says something about life expectancy, but of course I expect my life. So plain, I thought nothing would ever take it. And while he explains, I cut my palms around my center, as if comforting a child or covering her ears. Tumor. On the scan, a monochrome nimbus of indiscernible material. My own, of course, but its intentions opaque. Its mouth, not a mouth, but a zero, a cipher, a space indicating a question it will not ask of itself. It requires me, like a child, to do another thing I'd rather not, to speak on its behalf, to determine its name so I might call it by it, so I might be accurate in my address. This precise knowing, something like tenderness, my obsessive attention and ersatz love, and I cannot turn away from it. Unblinking oculus of my center, blank eye staring from benthic depths, and while I'm at it, it resembles too, I think, a fruit if fruit were buried, chthonic pomegranate, Pompeian fig cocooned, or else the dark countenance of the moon, one of its seas, or the orphan planet of the dead, motherless stone, God of no and never. Angel. After a month of asking, suddenly a voice. It says, you deserve that which has happened to you. It says, I see what you do with your long, terrene hands. Maundering through the banalities of my life, it follows, speaking as if from a frosty bag of peas in the freezer aisle, speaking while I am on my knees, scrubbing the bathroom floor, trying to love a man. Its speech is disquieting company, but company nonetheless. The TV left on and turned low. It desperately wants my attention, but is polite, which is its defining weakness. Sometimes I catch it stirring out of the corner of my eye, a glint at the end of my cat's whiskers, a spangle on the ceiling of indiscernible source. More often, though, it looks like me, only a little off, like my reflection in the pregnant belly of a spoon. In fact, when I speak to it, I use my own name. I'm not sure if it minds. It repeats instead its refrain. It says, God has plans for you. It says, I didn't say they were good. And I'm going to read just a couple last ones from here and then switch, I think, to a couple new ones. Let's see, what do I feel like reading from here? Mix it up. Okay. Testimony. There is a God, and there is no God but him. He has many names and answers to none. On the day of judgment, I'll be called by my name and by the name of my Father. My name, the dark I was forged in, dark which rehearses its return while I sleep. Indeed, one day I will return to God as it is to him that I belong. Indeed, this was part of the message, and the message was received. I do not speak for God, and he does not speak to me. This an arrangement, estrangement. When asked my religion, I answer, surrender. I pray with my head to the floor, with my hands where he can see them, with both eyes closed. All this for paradise, which lies at the feet of mothers. Beneath my feet, the temporal earth, which darkens where I stand. Annunciation. I have come to accept the story of my own obedience. How I waited, not knowing I was waiting, ear obliging, body poised. You sent a man I could not look at fully or touch. He was a flame which spoke, and I could not be afraid. As it's told, I rose instinctive as a dove, startled into flight, blue veil fluttering floorward and tongue unglued. May it be done to me, I said, and it was done so quickly. I thought to say it meant I had some say, but it was preordained. The breath barely out of my body, before my mind had changed. Let's see, I think I'll end with another Mary poem. Switch to mothers. Questions directed toward the idea of Mary. Was it the voice you feared, or its shadow? Did you long for his touch, or was suffering enough for you to know he was there? Do you resent me, my juvenile hungers? Do you wish for me the freedom of a vast, barren plain? What would you have done with your body if your body obliged? Did it please you, your son risen at the end like a question? Do you pity the angels, their ancillary lives? Did your worship falter once you were sure you were good? How long did you live before yielding to your inevitable shame? And how long before you realized? Did you realize? Shame was a blade you turned against yourself. And once you knew it, you could use it. Just read maybe two from here. This is a chapter that came out this year with my teacher and I, Dorianne Lux, the wonderful Dorianne Lux, where we wrote poems to each other in the pandemic. Yeah, I want to read two. Thank you for sitting with me also. Okay, this one's called Trying. When I see the article about the polar bears wandering into Russian homes, I leave it open unread for a week and consider this trying. Because I am trying to be honest. I can't say I am doing my best or even trying my best, but at the very least, at my very worst, I'm trying. I wake up and this is trying, by which I mean I am sad and yet participate in the requisite functions of my life, usually without audible complaint or demonstrative suffering, trying for others' benefit to be polite, or trying to be honest because I'm embarrassed to be suffering. But I also mean this, that I am sad and it is difficult, a trial, a circumstance that tries my patience. This sadness is so annoying. I'm so sad it drives me crazy. Like everyone else, I try to do the dishes, to remember birthdays, not to pick at my degenerate skin. Because I am female, I try to fulfill domestic labors like cleaning out the fridge and unreciprocated kindness. I try to improve my appearance without making it evident I care about my appearance. I try to care about the right things while making it clear I'm still trying with my appearance so that men might consider fucking me. And I should consider this privately the measure of my worth. And because I'm American, I try to keep up with the crisis de l'heure, with domestic politics and public displays of rage. I try to be productive. I try to remember reusable bags for my produce, to reduce my footprint, to check pronouns and my privilege. I try to do my part to cause little harm, but because I am alive, harm comes with the territory upon which I rent is stolen, the city gentrified, and all year an unseasonable heat that I, minor accomplice, have to try very hard not to delight in. Short sleeves in February, sweating through Halloween. I admit it, for no defensible reason. I still eat meat, still drive on occasion to the CVS down the street. I've been known to tell a joke that verges on mean. I'm trying, I mean it, to be good in a way that is not covertly gendered or self-serving, to be accountable, to practice virtue without announcement, to make at least half as good what I leave as how I found it. Trying for you, ink blot, mirage, standing in the artificial dawn on cold tile, golden dew on a stick. First snow, pawing at the window to get in. And I'll finish with the poem about my hometown. I'm in Michigan right now, home for the holidays, but I'm not in my hometown. I'm in one of the suburbs of Detroit-ish. But my hometown is East Lansing, Michigan. So any of you Michiganders out there, go green. But this poem is about the strip mall, Eastwood Town Center. And I'm ending with it because I think it's a love poem, kind of. Yes, it's called Eastwood. Because it's June and there's nothing to do, we go to the strip mall at the edge of town. Someone's mother drives us. It isn't mine. These girls, they've got hair blaring red as a siren, no curfews, boyfriends and rumors of going all the way. I'm 14 and buttoned up in a blouse, bespectacled, a little shy. But last summer I tried to die, which makes me interesting. We loiter in the moist heat of the parking lot, calling lewd things to strangers across the relucent sea of asphalt, laughing with our whole mouths. Every part of us gleams, our licked fingers sticky from free Krispy Kremes, our lips glossed, cheap cherry. We're not that beautiful, but we're young, which to men we're old enough to know is close. We stare them down, perched on the curb. We bare our thighs like secrets that have hurt us. Sitting there, impatient, one girl might kiss suddenly another, giggling, shadows merging on the pitted sidewalk, eyes open to see if they're seen. And at the very least, there's me, ever the apprentice in tenderness and nerve. When a man eventually, inevitably approaches, we rise as birds do, all at once, flushed and shrieking until we regroup out of reach, our bodies heaving against each other as if we have narrowly escaped a fate we know to fear, but can't name. Then we do it again, to be sure. When the sun swells before the skies mantling like a rosy bubble, we wander snapping hubba-bubba as the streetlights pop on above us, proffer wishes and gossip like they're makeshift stars. We wait for someone to wonder where we are, find ourselves waiting long into the dark. I think we like this part best, the night falling over our shoulders like a borrowed sweatshirt, still warm, the blonde grasses whispering as we circle and circle the unclaimed lot, knowing that we could be forgotten, but are not. And if we listen hard, before someone comes for us, some nights our names are called between guitar riffs on the classic rock station, blaring from rusted cars and the bar patio across the street. Songs we know by heart. Songs our fathers once sang to our mothers before they were ours, or anyone's. Ballads that made them believe it was possible they could, a lifetime, love, be loved, desperately, like that. Thank you. And now, Monica, passing it over.
Thank you so much, Leila. I always feel like I've entered into sacred space listening to you read. It's so devotional, it's so powerful. Thank you. Thank you to Brookline Booksmith for having us. This is one of my favorite bookstores, so this is a real dream, and it's a total dream to read with Leila, who is one of my teachers, who was the leader of my workshop at Tin House. I know that we have some of our other cohort members from that, from Tin House here, so sending you all a lot of love. And just, yeah, Leila, your work has been so transformative for me, and has really invited me to write about the things I want and need to write about, and I'm so grateful to read with you. Hi everyone, I'm Monica, and I'm recovering from laryngitis, so I hope that I've been resting my voice in preparation for tonight, so I hope that the sound is okay. And I just wanted to say a word before starting to read, which is that I wanted to dedicate my reading tonight to the 5 lives lost in the shooting in Colorado Springs and to their families. And I have a poem in my book that was written after the Pulse nightclub shooting. And I know, Leila, you also have a poem that you wrote about the same subject. That shooting was in 2016. And I thought about opening with that poem tonight. And I decided not to because I wanted to foreground queer resilience and queer life and joy to the extent that I could. My poems are not always so joyful, but I really wanted that to be the focus of my reading rather than death and loss of life. So just reading these poems in honor of all of our people who are struggling to survive and thrive in this country and in this world. And I'm going to read to you all from my new collection, Might Kindred. And I'll start with the title poem. Might Kindred. Sitting next to a queer poet at the reading, my shoulder houses a tiny rosebud, its petals wound tightly against its other petals. Is this a queer poetics, the way my body becomes terrarium at the chance of recognition? At the front, in the dark of the room, a poet builds the city with his teeth, and I become the smallest petal on the smallest flower in the wildest field of words. God of desire, who rules that quiet sky, friendship. Bring me a cousin, a cousin, a cousin. Bring me a soft plot of soil. Meet me in the space between native countries, city wildflower lush, where blue becomes blue. I want to tell you a story thick with maroons. Praise how we tip toward, spill bright petals, praise glass opening out. Is this queer poetics? God of fragile new friendship, war of tender on asphalt. In front of this stranger, I unhook, small surgery offered in case we might kindness, might ardor together. Meet me queer in the city, might kindred, might light a match. I have longed for a fire of flowers. Family is an illumination of shoulders. Walking the ocean with my mother. She's every age she's ever been. My shoulder cupped in the shadow of her shoulder, nested against the heaving shoulders of the sea. All of us breathing, all of us threaded by salt. My lover and I decide to parent a dog, continent of paddling fur, clawed toe on my knee, hospitality of eyes that say more. We used to be 2 shoulders brushing, now more. Love smells of earth, dander, and rain. At night, I write letters to my grandmother's brother. Dear Mendy, my thoughts become fingers, yellowed hands 100 years old. Mendy of the boats, needle, threading, island to island. I know you. My eyebrows grow closer together on the wet bridge between bedroom and cousin, Mendy of the boats that left Europe. My lover and I visit my grandmother, sit elbows touching as she asks about Russia in Spanish, asks them cuántos idiomas, asks us how many beds do you sleep in? We don't lie and we don't tell the truth. We just give her our eyes. Don't tell her, my mother reminds me every visit. Mendy of the traveling forearms, Mendy of sand long buried north of Jerusalem. Mendy, have you seen? In these countries, the cities are too far away from the sea. Granddaughters, an ocean apart from their mothers. Of course, they would wind up in bed with more breasts. Surely a creature with no language can more easily love me. A skull mossed over with black and white spots, ducking into my crotch as an act of affection. Beside a small lapping beast, I know I am a beast. Hot curve of her belly leaning into my thigh. I push my face into her face. God queers the mountain. The last time I taught the story about the mountain, I tented my fingers into a mountain. See what I did there? And people laughed and leaned closer to consider the base of the mountain, thumb touching thumb, or to consider the peak where my fingers rested triangularly together. In the story, God raises the mountain over the people, either lifting it to hover or flipping it by inverting the triangle, plunging the heavenly peak toward the earth. To be a human being is to walk that bridge slung between what is mortal and what is sky. We call that story mountain like cask or mountain like rooftop or the threat of the law. But I'm thinking, let's call it God queers the mountain, master of inversions, insisting the world is capable of being in ways we never saw coming. One student says, if God flipped the mountain, then something is falling off of the mountain towards the people. This had never occurred to me. And now I imagine the landslide of rocks, branches, and scripture pouring down the face of the upside down mountain at the people who stand there and tremble, try to keep their palms open. To be a human being is to encounter debris. To be human is to keep breathing as the gifts and the threats of the mountain hurl toward you. At the reading, the trans novelist talks about rewriting Norse and Greek myths. Someone asks, what is it about the mythic and fabulous that so populates the queer imagination? Someone else responds, archetypes, belonging, new roots. Later that night, a friend asks me, why did it feel like it mattered so much when you made the mountain with your hands? We are slung to the mountain. When it flips, we flip. When it trembles, we tremble. When it takes a new body, when it transforms its shape, when it is lonely or stable or wise. To be queer means to listen for the stories of ancestors and find yourself stacked up against trees, boulders, breathing the breath of the mountain, the inverted mountain. I'll also read a bit of a love poem. Now we live together. My lover is eating a popsicle and kisses me at the cold center of lips, teeth, purple. It is sloppier, wetter, softer, more joyful than you can imagine. Writing about happiness is so boring. It involves waking first beside them and closing the bedroom door as I tuck myself against lavender morning in the kitchen. Later, when they wake up, their hand grazes my hip. They sit down to practice their breath while I leave for work. It involves large pots of soup they simmer for me full of cabbage. One cabbage can yield a surprising quantity of soup, so we knife it apart and delight at its ruffled density. The cut open cross folds look like outlines of bodies with V's nested between legs. We tell jokes about our ancestors, passing one another in the aisles of trains riding between Belarus, Transylvania. The jokes are funny until they're not funny, since trains aren't neutral, and people like us who have sex with these bodies aren't supposed to be making a home. We ask our ancestors with their secrets and with their train tickets and grocery lists for their blessings, and then we go for a walk on the beach wearing jackets. When my lover trips in the sand, I'm down there beside them, and they say, thank you for falling with me. Writing about happiness isn't exactly a love letter to my great-grandmother, but it isn't not that either. Her husband died when she was younger than I am. She never remarried. One thing I want to share about this book is that for me, many of these poems are sort of circling around the complexity of belonging and how messy and necessary it is for me. And particularly, I mean, exploring many things, including being a first generation US citizen, first generation of my family born in this country, and also being the child of immigrants who are themselves the children of immigrants, and sort of that experience of being a kind of diasporic family, moving between so many places that we call home, or find a place for ourselves. So there are two poems in this book that are titled Emblanquecer, and I'm going to read the note from the back of the book that contextualizes the title, and then I'm going to read a few poems that are in that vein. In Spanish, Emblanquecer, which appears as the title of two poems in this collection, means to whiten. It refers to the specific whitening the race campaigns in Latin America that promoted European immigration and access to social and economic privilege for European immigrants, which includes the way that both sides of my family immigrated to Venezuela from Romania and Czechoslovakia. Here, it is also used to refer to the assimilation of some Latinx and Jewish people into whiteness and white supremacy culture in the United States. Emblanquecer. When I was born, the air was pale and green and gold. They came to the United States to be a bigger highway. They came to Venezuela when Pérez Jiménez decided to emblanquecer la raza. What this country doesn't know could be another country altogether. Emblanquecer looks like embalm to me, how lifeless things become enshrined instead of being turned back into earth when they stop sourcing life. When I was born, my oxygen was pressurized, a cabin in an aircraft hovering no homelands, my brother making shadow puppets against corrugated walls. And then more siblings came, and with them the unsiblings. At stake, the always airplane upping me away from. Small islands are affixed to me. The other white kids call them freckles. The cousins say lunares. Lunar, like my other mother calendar. Continents float by like elephants. Whiteness, smooth and supple on the mouths and mortgages of my relations. It's very hard to be something by way of boat or trunk, by way of asthmatic empire. Or maybe all the time I spend negating what I am is just avoidance. At stake, so many lives, so many murderous relations. Compelled by smell, butterflies migrate toward milkweed miles away, compelled by smell's white compass. Every time I try to write this down, the words start to dart away from me. It is a bandaged half-dream, a bungled nightmare. This is someone else's map, I think, pointing wildly in the dark. No one is here but me, and all my ghosts. I pull the documents like eyelids over me. Citizenship papers, repatriation. I pull the curtains up. A poem with two memories of Venezuela. The first time, her hair was sunlight, and it moved in loud, wet rivulets, and it warmed me, and it darkened my eyebrows to be so close to her. She passed small beads of fruit into my mouth. My teeth became seeds, and my blood became guava. My own hair became highways, knotted and tangled, and she patted my exhaust-fuming head to tell me I was beautiful. I was a child, squinting into how huge and how warm and how mine and not mine her body. The plane ride home was always about something unhitching and floating away, a sterilizing, dream-bleary goodbye. Arriving home with one less limb or finger, buttons wiggled loose on their threads, tongue slack on jangling teeth. Later, when I became too busy for her, lines of age scored both our cheeks and skin spattered from the cloud lust of storms. From great distances, I spoke her name aloud, then less, then more, her gales up-throating a continent, scaling a continent like a stairwell to sweep a voice through the wind chime of my memory. She carved me out of distance, condensation, certain objects stowed in the closet in the room my grandmother would stay in when she'd come to visit. She carved me out of oil-slick waters, salt-encrusted rains, mud cascading over city hills, becoming clay, carrying dust of human origins. She carved me out of pixelated images of street protests, socialist revolutions, grocery stores with barren shelves. She slid a tongue into my mouth, so I've made do with two. She taught me supple light and forests lacing between coasts and pregnant mammals braying on their haunches in the always summer wind. It's hard to say what an immigrant is, a cluster of ants held in the palm. See how they circulate urgent on skin, see how they spiral, how their legs never stop moving. Certain children are prone to tip over the rock and upturn a whole city of ants, then track their escape routes. It's hard to say what an immigrant is. There is a place in you, fertile as soil, but changeling as weather. There's a place in you. It raised you and gave you the letters of too many languages. It gave you your tenderness, your distance, your rage. What a child of an immigrant is, thrice born, 3 sets of eyes, belonging to no one, carrying documents written with invisible ink, speaking languages scavenged from cousins and radio hosts, or else speaking the silence, that primary language of people who have been exactly everywhere and nowhere, excavated and learned by the gaps in between. I'm going to read one more, shortest poem in my book, and I just wanted to close with this, dedicated to Leila for the chance to read together. I'll let the poem speak for itself, but this is how it feels to get to share this space with you. It's called Origin Stories. If you don't ask the poet if anyone in her family was a poet, you will miss the story of her grandmother, who wrote long-form poems advertising groceries in Santiago, and you will miss the story about her other grandmother, who sang for the radio, composed her own lyrics. Why wouldn't you assume she's got poets in her family? When women talk, the air is sliced like skins of fish. When women talk, creation bends its knees. Thank you all. Thank you for your listening.
That was stunning. Thank you both for sharing space together and with us. It's really, really wonderful to be able to hear you both read. So thank you for joining us tonight. We have entered the Q&A portion of our event. We already have a few questions going in the Q&A box, but if anyone's listening and has questions that they want to ask either of these amazing poets, just use the Q&A box down at the bottom of your screen. And that way it'll be easier for me to sort of peek at your question so it won't get lost in the chat. We have our first question, let's see, from Dana. And this one is specifically for Leila, but I think it actually invites a question, a larger question for both of you. So Dana's wondering about if Leila, you could speak to the spiraling form of tumor and just about your decision to play with the layout on the page. And I actually am curious, especially from both of you, if you want to talk a little bit about form on the page, because I think it's especially interesting to hear about when we don't get to sort of see the poems as you read them. So I'd love to hear from you both.
Yeah, I love that question. So this is what it looks like. This is tumor, which is a spiral. So I'm a weird writer in that I don't really revise in a way that is typical. So when I write, I think of it as like wet cement. Whatever I write, I can fiddle with while I'm in the like immediacy of it. But once I've let it sit for a second, then it's too brittle and I can't mess with it anymore. So I was messing around with tumor, and I was writing it, and I'd been writing it, normally left aligned, and I'd written a couple lines, and maybe like 4 lines. I think it was about 4 or 5 lines, and I was really frustrated because the lines were not even. Like there was a very long line, and that was kind of shorter, and very jagged in a way that it was very strange looking, kind of sawtoothed. And I could not, for the life of me, get it to look right. Like I tried to mess with the line breaks and make it more even, and it wasn't working. It didn't look right, didn't sound right, it didn't feel right. And I had this feeling, if I cannot figure out how this is supposed to look, I can't keep writing it because it's really upsetting me. I don't know. Something was not feeling right. And so I thought for a second, I was like, well, right now I'm looking at them, so the lines are going horizontally, of course. But like, what if they didn't have to go horizontal? What if I didn't actually have to worry about how long they were because they weren't being held against each other in that way? So I started actually on Word, putting them in these little text boxes and curving them to see what would happen if they could curve around each other. And that's actually how I wrote the poem. So once I curved it and saw that it could make like a circle-y type thing, a spiral, it satisfied whatever inside my brain was not happy before. And I said, yes, this is how it should be. And so I actually wrote the poem in a spiral. And so it actually, I think, figuring out that was the form it needed to be in, then also helped, because then it got smaller, inevitably as you move through, because there's less and less space. You have to move within the poem. So it became a container that it told me when it was going to be over. And it looks like a tumor in that it's circular, but then it also looked like a zeroing into something, or like a falling into something like a tunnel, and ends with no and never kind of at the farthest point of this pit. And so I think, for me, I've been really interested in poems that break free of like what we think a poem's box should look like. I've been writing a lot of work recently that I don't know, it's like, we see language all over the place in our lives, and they're not always in a very neat, orderly fashion. And I think the way that, words appear on the page, or, the way that you allow them to come out can change what's being said. I think if you start to disrupt or disorient, even the directionality, then you might disrupt and disorient the things that are being said, or the thoughts that are coming out. There's a quote that was my high school yearbook quote, which is, if they give me lined paper, I'll write the other way. So I think that's it's kind of funny, and I think it's continued to be an ethos for me as a writer. Yeah, Monica, I want to hear your answer. I'm very curious about this.
Well, I'm so glad that this question got asked specifically about tumor, and that you showed it to us. That poem, when I first saw it and read it, it really opened something up for me about what a poem can be. And it has really stayed with me, which I think is related to what I want to say about form. I'm sort of the opposite. I feel like I'm kind of in the school of like writers who find writing excruciating but love revision and feel like that's really where the kind of art making happens. And so for me, I just want to get the material out and then kind of put it away and return to it and start to sculpt it. It's what Jericho Brown calls sort of creating a mess of text. So like, I just want the mess on the page, and then I can really come back to it and hone it. And I think of form as an antidote to loneliness. It feels like as soon as we're working with form, we're not isolated or alone as writers. And, we're in this kind of echo chamber of everyone before us who's ever written, a pantoum or a sonnet or a ghazal or whatever it is. And that it feels like an honor to get to be there. And I often feel both connected to a lineage of writers when working in form, and connected to the person who's taught me the form. And Leila, this poem in particular, I have not yet had the courage to write in this way where it's really illustrated and so dynamic and alive on the page. But I think of you, and I know that if I try, I'll be in that room with you.
Oh, I'm excited for that feature. I want to see that poem when it comes.
Now I've said it publicly, so
yeah. Now everyone's going to hold you to it.
Yeah, everyone, we'll all be waiting. What a beautiful way too of thinking about form as an antidote for loneliness in the process. That's what a wonderful way of framing it. We've got several questions, so I'll try to make sure we can get them all answered. Sika asks, has a question for both of you, and they're wondering if you have a writing process and if you have any advice for less experienced poets in developing a process.
Ooh, a process. I don't know. Do you have an answer, Monica? I'm trying to think about my process. What's your process?
Well, I'll say like a couple things that feel sort of top of mind. One is just read, and read and read. Reading, I think, is the gateway to writing. And I don't actually think of them as different acts, like they're two parts of the same process. So reading and taking in a lot of poetry, I think, has been the key to me to writing poetry. I think not being too attached to a process. Like there were so many years where I thought a writer has a dedicated, structured practice that looks the same every day or every week, and really letting go of that and giving myself permission to go through seasons where I need different things, where I'm writing different quantities. That has meant a lot. And definitely like sitting down and doing the writing and sort of structuring that and building ritual around it is important to me, but letting go of the preciousness about the process itself actually has been very helpful for me.
I love
Those are a
that.
couple of things. Yeah.
Yeah, the preciousness. I always joke with students because I love this idea. I think, people imagine being a poet is like you're at a desk and it's like on a cliff and there's like these big dramatic waves and you're like on your typewriter, and like that is not I've never been in that situation, and I hope one day to be, but that has not been how my poems are written. But I do have like a very generally a very like set way that I like to come to the page, if it, like a preference. And so I'm a morning writer. I love to wake up at like 6 a.m., make a cup of tea, and go straight to my desk. I put on classical music, I bring out books, and I just block out the world. I love writing when it seems like nobody on earth is alive or awake. Like I need like extreme isolation or the illusion of isolation. So I love writing in the morning because nobody is calling me, expecting anything from me. If I'm avoiding my email, it's not a problem yet, So I work in the morning. I work best in the morning, I would say. I like using my computer. I think that that's part of my process. I think, as I said, like, because I do this weird, I have some of my favorite people are the kinds who can like make a beautiful poem out of the dump that just happens. I cannot for the life of me. I'm not a sculptor. I'm like I don't know. I'm a collage maker maybe, or something. I don't know. I need like to have the very little amount of material that I'm working with. And so I work down the page, or maybe I'm like what do you call it? Like I'm a weaver or something, I think that maybe that's the way I write poems. Mm-hmm. So I don't revise. And so, or I revise as I go, I like pick out the last couple lines and fiddle with them, but I don't go up and like totally restructure. So I'm very slow, I guess is the thing I was going to say, as I'm a slow poet, because sometimes, I'll get 6 lines, 7 lines in, and that's as far as I can go at that time. And I sit there and I wait and I read and I get frustrated. Sometimes I leave. So there's some poems that I've left and returned to that have taken over a year to finish. And that's okay. I always have like 50 documents open on my Word. So a lot of works in progress. I read out loud when I'm writing. I reread and reread and reread. I like the sound. So I use it as a way to figure out where I'm going by sound. And like Monica, I think reading is like 80% of the practice. If I'm not reading, I know that I'm not writing. And I guess, so I said I'm a writer, typer. for the poems themselves. But in terms of when I'm reading, I use a paper journal to take notes. So I have many journals. They're all of the same kind. I'm very neurotic, and they use the same pens. But I have these paper journals that whenever I'm reading out in the world, thinking, I keep notes for research. I keep notes of lines I like. I keep notes on forms. I keep notes on words, anything that's of interest to me. So I have these journals next to me that are resources that I look through when I'm writing. And the last thing I would say is that, I loved what Monica was saying about not being precious. Anytime that I've hit writer's block, it was always because I was putting too much force on what a poem was supposed to be or do. And every time what has broken me free of that horrible silence is playing games. So when I trick myself into thinking I'm not writing, that's the best. And so if I create a very weird thing that I'm like, there's no way this experiment's going to be published. So then that, to me, that means I'm just playing, I'm just doodling or noodling or whatever word you want to use. If I can pretend that it's entirely a game, I write very easily, and so that's my way back in to writing. Every time it's okay, give me a weird game, let's play something. My partner, luckily, my fiance is wonderful and is always very encouraging of word games. So we do a lot of poem games. And I also love form, a traditional form. I work a lot in form. Through the pandemic, I've been writing probably 90% in form because it provides the scaffold. So, if you're like me and are very anxious, you're already part of the way done when you just type in the way the form works on your document. It's no longer a blank page. You suddenly have, some bones. And if it's something like a pantoum or something, the second you write 2 lines, you're already halfway done. You just keep using them. So sometimes they're great. They can kind of cheat. So yeah, that was a long answer, but that's the mismatch of my process.
Amazing. I feel like there's just finding all those little sort of inlets into the process, whatever they may be. That sounds like you both have many inlets, which is amazing. We have 2 more questions. Would you guys be okay if we went a little late so we can? Okay, cool.
Let's do it.
Beautiful
questions.
Yeah. So we have a question from Lisa, who says, first of all, they thank you both for the reading, and they say, I love both your work so much. There's one question from Monica, which is, Lisa's reading Mike Kindred right now and wondering if you could talk a little about the sister poems and what they mean to you and or how they fit into the book. And then a question for both of you. Lisa asks if you could talk a little about how you order and organize the poems for a collection.
Fun. That frog in my throat is really coming forward for this Q&A. So
Nice.
Let
it out. Yeah, let it out.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll share for context about this question. There are, I don't actually know how many, maybe 5 poems in my book that are all titled When My Sister Visits, and they're very short and they occur repeatedly throughout the collection. And first thing I'll say is that I don't have a sister. I actually have a brother. So the first sort of cat out of the bag is that I'm writing in this collection about the character of this sister who feels very real for me and is not my not my sort of blood and bones sister. These poems, for me, they actually all were one long poem originally. And the origin of them, they came out of just an experience that I think is something I'm sort of reflecting on a lot in these poems of feeling accompanied, feeling sistered, feeling kind of reflected back to myself by, in this case, a very beloved mentor who visited me in Chicago, where I was living at the time when I wrote these, and sort of just gave me back a piece of myself. And so I was writing originally this poem titled When My Sister Visits, which was a sort of exploration of what it feels like to find that kinship and belong or feel that it's possible to exist. And then the poem was published in its full form in a journal. And then I was working with a different writing teacher, Shira Ehrlichman, and she really pushed me on this one. She was like, what if we broke this apart? And what if you wrote 50 of these When My Sister Visits poems? It doesn't feel done to me. I'm kind of obsessed with your weird shadow sister. Why are you writing about her? Like, what is she teaching you? And this character emerged for me, this sister who kind of challenges me to confront parts of myself in ways that are both challenging and loving, and sort of turns the mirror back onto me in kind of a twisted way. She's both an antagonist and like a beloved. And so I didn't write 50, but I wrote probably 15 or 20, and then picked the ones that really spoke to me, that felt like they belonged in the collection, and drop them in, which I think also is just a pitch for games, playing with your writing and being willing to kind of explode something that you thought was done. This was a poem that was published in a journal. I was like, this poem is finished. And then someone invited me to actually let go of that and see how else I could sort of push the learning. So I played with it.
That's so fun to get an insight into that. I love that. And I love the idea that, like there's that, who said it, the quote about the poem never being done, just abandoned. Who said that? Yeah. So I love the idea that like even post publishing, that it has, more lives or like different versions. It's growing too. It's cool. As for order, oh my God. How do you order a book? To be honest, when I got to the end of Deluge, and I had all these, I had like, I think there's like 70 poems or something in the book. I was really panicked, and I was like, I don't know how these go together. It seemed massive. I did this thing where I had like all the pages printed out, and thought of, everyone does like cute thing where they put the pages on the floor and stuff, and I was like, this is horrifying. It was like taking up my entire home. There was no space. It was just, that was not helping me at all. Because it was just like, oh my God, like, I don't know how these, things work. So I printed the book out smaller, so that like a page would have 4 poems on it as opposed to 1, so like each one had a little rectangle, and then I cut those out because those are about the size of a note card, and so I put all of the mini poems on note cards, and then my brilliant idea was to, once I had the stack of all the poems in a note card stack, as I just threw them all over my living room. And I have like a video of it. But I went down then afterwards to look on the floor and see where they all landed. And I started moving things around. And some of them I'd be like, yeah, that definitely doesn't go next to this, or, but there were some things that because of their randomized placement, I was like, actually, now I'm seeing a link between this poem and this poem that I hadn't seen before. Maybe there's an image that's like recurring or ends on a kind of question. And this one like opens with one, weird things that were like connections that only happened once it was randomized and once I kind of threw myself out of that experience. So that was a big part in kind of cracking open for me, like what I might structure, because I had all these different threads in the book, and I knew I didn't want to do sections that were like, here's all the Mary poems, here's all of the, that felt too rigid. But I also didn't know, I guess, so I was worried that I had to go chronologically, because I was worried that, this is a real event in which something happened and then other things happened, and, then it's not done. So I was really struggling with that. And I called a teacher, or a guide in my life, Gregory Pardlow, the wonderful poet Gregory Pardlow, and said, Greg, I don't know how to structure this book. And he said, the mystery is not like you have to figure out what the arc is, and like the kind of climactic moment, just like you would with a novel. And he said, the mystery in your book is not that you survived, because you obviously wrote the book. And that like opened something for me. I kept feeling like, oh, if I reveal that obviously I lived through this experience, then that's like, I don't know, letting the cat out of the bag or something, you know? He said, but once you free yourself from that being like the reveal, what is it that you're actually working toward? And what is the kind of main emotional peak or things like that? And that was very helpful for me. And I realized that the main peak is not obviously that I survive, but it ended up being working toward figuring out about shame. And so once I kind of understood that that was actually more of the heightened peak, I was able to create sections that allowed for little resets. So there was parts that would go chronologically, section break, and then suddenly I'm back in time in childhood where I can kind of investigate some of these roots, and then kind of back in real time, another section break, reset. And so that freed me from, largely it's chronological, but not entirely. And so having that freedom of thinking about there's a difference between like the chronological, sequence of events and then the emotional sort of, arc as well. So randomness, having a really wise person kind of intercede a little bit, and section breaks, I don't know. In other things I've worked on, luckily, like Dorianne figured out the sequence for this one, thank God. And I don't know, and the one I've just written recently, Figment is an abecedarian, so the alphabet did it for me. So I don't know, in the future, I don't know, I'll have to figure out another way. But usually it's kind of a little terrifying, but just start somewhere, I think.
Yeah, it is terrifying. I agree with that, and very overwhelming. I'm going through that now with a collection that I'm trying to find. I find its shape, and until you find it, you're like kind of free falling, and you have to trust the process. And I'll just share like two things that feel resonant with what Leila shared. One is I have a similar process. I also printed my pages out as half sizers, not as quarter, but as half. And that really helped me because then I could really hold them all in my hands and move them around with more ease. And I annotated them. I also printed out a table of contents. And and Leila, I think you've told me you did a similar thing. So I started tagging them, like all of the themes. So it was like in all of these poems, my grandmother appears. And in all of these poems, the color red is really important. And in all of these poems, Caracas is there and whatever it was. And that helped. It allowed me to start to do some sorting and ordering that wove those themes together so that I could identify like what are the motifs and the themes and how do I want them to be shaped throughout. And I had a version of this manuscript that was like section 1, all the poems about Venezuela, section 2, queerness poems, section 3, poems about faith, etc. And a friend of mine who's also a poet, Sasha Warner Berry, read it and she was like, no, this is bad. This order, like, what are you doing? But what she said that also felt like a bright spot of advice in the process. And I've thought about this because it's what she shared with me, I think feels true, obviously, for collections that are more autobiographical, but I think this is true regardless for any collection of poetry. She said, the through line of these poems is you. It's not like your grandmother or Venezuela. It's not these themes. It's you already are the uniting thread between all of these poems. And so you can trust that and create something that feels more organic to how they move, because things in you don't sort of happen in, lineated boxes with clear labels on them. They are, organic and interwoven and integrated.
Absolutely. That's another wonderful way of framing the process. So we do have, we got a few like last minute questions, so I don't think we'll have time to get to all of them, but we do have a nice question that I think would be kind of a nice note to end on. Kawita asks if you could both speak, and Leila, you spoke to this a little bit, but how you write through a dry spell, and like how do you shake that loose? I think that it feels like a very sort of hopeful final question to end on.
Yeah. Yeah, the dry spells, my God. I wrote Deluge and my first two chapbooks in this like frenzy of like 2 or 3 years of really intensive writing, where I was writing, God, so many poems. And then as soon as I finished Deluge, there was like this deep, deep silence that was terrifying. And I was really depressed actually about it. And I tried to read all these books on cognition and creativity, like thinking that I could outsmart my brain or like figure out like, rewire something in there and get it working. But everything that I encountered basically was telling me that writer's block is usually or almost always about internal pressure. And so like either expectations about what the poem needs to be, or too harsh expectations on needing to produce. Or in my case, I think part of it was that what I needed to write about, I did not want to write about. And so I was actively avoiding something. And I think, it's like I could try and write a poem about dogs all I wanted or whatever. Like that's not what I actually needed to say. And I think that I was hiding something, and I was so afraid that if I were to write, then that thing would come out. And that's not a good way to write. That's just not. I do believe that if something's pressing on you, you probably need to get that out. And so if you're in a dry spell, maybe assess first, like if there's something that you're not saying. And that's okay. You don't always have to write it, or certainly you don't have to share it yet, but you might need to start doing some unearthing. There might be something there. I think that's my first piece of advice, because that's always been true for me. The second thing, though, is definitely being aware that you're writing, the way you write might look different as time goes on. I'm so grateful to have had mentors that sort of told me about the ebbs and flows that would come, that sometimes you're in a highly productive mode and sometimes there's like long silences, but that also the ways in which you write will look different. I'm not a mother yet, but I'm sure when I'm a mother, that will look different. It certainly has been different in periods of wellness and sickness. I live with chronic illness, and so periods where I'm more sick, my writing looks different. And some of that some of the time I thought I was not writing was because I was not writing in the way that I was used to in the morning at my computer. I was writing on my phone at night and writing in like Google Docs and notes pages, which felt not official. It felt like, they were very brief, weird poems. And so I was very dismissive of them. But then, a year or two later, I came to understand like, oh no, that was actually writing. Those were actually poems. They're just not the way that I had assigned writing or something. And so now I'm trying to be way more generous and like forgiving with the ways, I think that you can scare away the muse or whatever that is by being very harsh about the ways it needs to appear. So I'm open to whatever. If I'm writing something on a receipt, that's good. If I'm writing something, in a text, and I'm like, ooh, actually, like that's kind of good. Let me screenshot it. Like any mode works. Games, like I've said, have been lifesavers for me, and I really love a project. So something that I guess is somewhat known about me is that I love chapbooks. I have 4 chapbooks. I hope to continue writing chapbooks till the day I die. The reason I love chapbooks and chapbooks as their own thing is because it's such a doable goal. You can write a chapbook like in a month. You could write a chapbook in a week. I wrote Ebb in a day. So I think like if you really want to, anything's possible. But a chapbook is about like 15 to 20, maybe 30 pages. That's like a month if you wanted to, if you wrote a poem a day. So I love that as a goal, setting some sort of goal that's low stakes for yourself, but that you can see yourself making progress. I love to have like a little, piece of paper or something with like a, I don't know, like almost, I'm thinking of like a thermometer, but you're like filling it up as it's going. You're like, oh, I'm almost there. Or like when elementary school, you're supposed to read like a certain amount of pages or something. I need like concrete progress. And I think with full lengths, it can feel like, oh my God, like the end is years away. And that can make me want to stall out. But having very concrete goals of what I'm trying to achieve and finish helps me write. It gets me out of that kind of like frightened state. So, sometimes I'll set very concrete things in terms of I'm writing all these poems as a specific form. Sometimes it's all about a specific subject. But I really like projects that helps me, projects and games, helps me climb out of the silence. Yeah.
So many of the strategies that I have were named. So just like total retweet, re-endorse everything I said. And I was thinking of just like three things came to mind, and they all actually feel like they have in common the role of other people in our writing process. And for me, that's just like it's like a lifesaver to be in relationship to other writers. So the first is just to go back to reading. Like when you are in a dry spell, just read and give yourself permission and know that reading is part of writing. And I think for me, I have like categories of writers. There are books I want to read and books that I love reading, but then there's like a different special category that is writers whose work gets me going. And I've learned over time who they are, where that feeling when you're reading something and you're like, I don't even know if I can get through this poem or this chapter, or this section, because I feel the urge to actually start my own creative process. Like the reading has generated and sort of gotten your juices flowing, and keeping track of what those books are and who those writers are and going back to them, like holding it lightly, like without a ton of expectation, but just knowing who really inspires you to make, and then reaching for that as a resource. And another is just the accountability of other people, like going back to sharing some love for some of the folks on this call from my Tin House workshop. It's so helpful to have a small cohort of folks who you're writing with, like picking a month of the year and making a Google folder, and everyone has their doc, and you're going in and doing a poem a day. And I've so many times said, I'm going to do a poem a day, like by myself, in just like the month of March or whatever it is. And, 4 or 5 days in, it's hard for me to actually sustain that. But when I'm in a shared practice with other people, and I know that we are all chugging along through that month together, and we are able to share our work with one another, it just makes a huge difference. So just having that lifeline of relationship and accountability. I really agree with Leila, just sometimes giving yourself 30 days to write a poem a day. It's amazing how much you can generate out of the pressure, and how much you surprise yourself by just having to put a poem down that day. And so many writers say that so many pieces in their books are generated in those kind of structures and formats that involve other people. That's been true for me. And also, just to add to this conversation about forms, for me, epistolary poems help a lot. And a lot of poems that I write, they start as a letter, they'll have at the title of it, like, dear so-and-so. And then eventually in the revision process, that part might get cut. But sort of speaking to someone, whether it's a real person in my life or an ancestor or another writer, just like having an address to make makes a huge difference in terms of pulling language out of me. And so I think one of my tricks for a dry spell is to just write letters or letter poems, because my voice is different when I'm actually talking to someone, something, somewhere. It could be dear place, dear feeling, but just to be in relationship has been helpful for me.
I love that. I love hearing how much of your practice and your yourself as a writer is so engaged to others and connected to others. I love that about you. Like thinking of form and thinking of like ways out of the right. I love how connected, like, because that is the point, right, of all this, is to know we're not alone in the universe. And I love that that's kind of, it seems like the engine that pushes you. And I love that. Basically, I'm just saying I love you.
I mean, same. Well, we're up against so much loneliness as writers. And I'm with you, Leila. I'm a morning writer. I like to write when everyone else in my household is fast asleep. All of that felt so true for me. So I don't want to downplay the importance of quiet and solitude. It's essential, I think. And there's a balance there. And, you know, I love getting to do this with you because I have found so much invitation and inspiration in your work. So you're one of those writers in my corner who pull it out of me.
Monica. Likewise, listening to your reading makes me want to actually, like I might write a Google poem tonight, so we'll see. Google Doc poem.
I'm gonna write a Dear Layla poem, so
yes!
Yeah.
Beautiful. Oh my God. That's exactly, you should share them. Now everybody in the chat knows. Everyone knows.
It's like super accountability.
Yeah, there you go.
The whole internet.
Yeah. The modern era. Look what it can bring out of us in a good way, sometimes in a bad way, but mostly in a good way. Community. Well, on that note, we do have to wrap up, but thank you so much to our incredible audience for these really wonderful questions. And of course, thank you, Mónica, and thank you, Leila, for sharing your work with us and for such thoughtful answers to our audience questions. I just dropped a link in the chat, but I'll do it one more time. If you haven't yet gotten a copy of either Deluge or my Kindred, they are both available at the link I just dropped until 9 a.m. tomorrow. And I also do want to point out for you, Mónica and Leila, that there are some really lovely messages in the chat. So if you haven't gotten a chance to read those, definitely scroll through, because folks were just delighted to hear you read, and we're very present, which is always so wonderful to see. So again, thank you, Mónica, thank you, Leila, and thank you to the wonderful audience, who is just truly stellar. Really great messages and questions. And until next time, I guess we'll see you maybe soon.
Thank you all. Thank you, Mónica.
Thank you,
Thank you, Brookline
Booksmith.